Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a morning of reflection, contemplation, and meditation. It's my pleasure, first of all, to introduce Father Laurence, but it occurs to me before I do so that I should remind you please to switch off mobile phones, or at the very least turn them to silent. Father Laurence is a well-known and experienced meditator. I'll say a little more about him later in the morning, but in the meantime he's going to lead us in a preliminary meditation to start the morning's events. So, Father Laurence.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning. There's a verse from one of the letters of St. Paul that I think all of us, regardless of our tradition, would resonate with this morning. He says, "May your minds be remade and your whole nature thus transformed." May your minds be remade and your whole nature thus transformed. Meditation and our gathering here this morning is part of that process. It doesn't happen in one sitting or in one day. It is a lifetime journey, but it's one of the greatest blessings of our lives to experience, to feel the desire and the need to meditate. Even if we don't know exactly what that involves or why we feel that attraction. The reason it's such a blessing to want to meditate is that it highlights an essential human aspiration, and it gives us a way to fulfill that aspiration. Even if you are a young child, and young children can meditate even better than we can. The aspiration is, whether it's conscious or not, to find ourselves by losing ourselves. And in that sense, all meditation, like all loving, transcendence. Our rational mind, of course, is rather perplexed by this idea that we find ourselves, that we become ourselves by losing ourselves, by letting go. But we have to trust to this paradox of the human. We have to trust our deeper mind and enter into a way of being that meditation opens up for us, like a door, like a passage, a way into something that we can't predict sometimes, but where we surprisingly find ourselves at home. And I think a universal sense of the meaning of the experience of meditation is that we come home to ourselves. The work of meditation does this by very powerfully throwing a light of consciousness, upon all the powers of illusion that so easily control us and become our. We shed of being of empty. At the time, impossible, and that we can let go of all the riches of thought and imagination. But the deeper mind will eventually convince us through the fruits of the practice, not by logical argument, but by what the founder of modern scientific method, Bacon, called proof, as experience is the highest degree of proof. So by our own experience is the teacher, we will discover that we're not wasting our time, but we're actually using time very wisely and usefully. So now as we lay aside our all thoughts and the whole stream of consciousness that we are swept up with, we radically simplify and unload the baggage of time. And we taste with the freshness of a child the simple wonder and the great delight of the present moment. That's what contemplation means, why meditation is a contemplative practice. The word contemplation comes from the Latin contemplum. The word templum doesn't mean this kind of beautiful building, or a mosque, or a temple, or a church, or a synagogue. The word templum originally meant the space in which those structures could be built. It's the spaciousness. Structures rise and fall, just physical structures, or the structures of our mind and imagination. They come and they go over time. But the templum is the spaciousness of the mind, of the heart, which is the real occupation of our meditation. So I'd like to lead us into this time of meditation now. We'll meditate for about 20 minutes in silence and stillness and in simplicity. These are the three active ingredients of meditation. To be silent means we pay attention, single-pointed attention. It means that we are still. The stillness of body during the meditation now will help to bring us to a stillness of mind. And simple, childlike, in which we're not analyzing ourselves or complicating ourselves, but we're simply being ourselves. So there are, of course, in the great traditions, different ways that we can move into this time of meditation and remain steady in it and do the work of attention that is the essential work of meditation. And I'd like to, and you may have your own way of meditation, of course, then you'll naturally practice that. But I'd like to, for those of you who may be new to this, I'd like to share with you a very simple way, which is also a very universal way, which is to take a single word or a short phrase, could be sacred in your own tradition. The word we recommend from our Christian tradition, but it is also a universal sound, is the word Maranatha. The important thing is that whatever word or phrase you take as the mantra, as your sacred word, as your meditation word, you stay with that throughout the time of the meditation. Faithfully, word, divest ourselves, pay attention, upright, straight, not relax, both, whatever makes you feel at one with mind and body. Close your eyes lightly, and then just be aware of your breathing for a few moments. As we breathe in, accepting the gift of life, we're also being taught this art of meditation, in fact, which we accept the gift of being, but we also let it go. This cycle, this rhythm of accepting and renouncing, that is at the heart of our meditation as well. As you pay attention to your breathing, you are beginning to take the attention off your thoughts, off that stream of thought, imagination, memory, prediction, analysis, and of course, all the many forms of illusion. Please introduce your word or mantra and repeat this word gently, without force, patiently, without demands, attentively and faithfully, in the sense that we keep returning to the word whenever we find ourselves distracted. We'll time the meditation with this gong.
Can I introduce the Rev from St. Martin in the Fields, who has a few words to say, I think, by way of welcome.
Neville Hodgkinson, who has been stuck in traffic for a long time, has arrived finally. I'm sure he'd like to take his on.
My name's Richard Carter. I'm the Associate Vicar here at St. Martin in the Fields. And this day, just this day, is a day that I personally look forward to at St. Martin's. Trafalgar Square is a very busy place with noise, with sirens, with lots taking place, all exciting things, and it's a church which has to relate to the world around us. But this day always seems to take us back to our spiritual roots and remind us that at the center of all things, this is a sacred place, a place to step aside, an oasis, a place with the true values of our lives. You see, silence is not something we do. Silence, if you like, is something we allow. And it's our hope that today you will welcome that into your own life and in the wider world. Silence is an image of one of them in hospital. What shall I do in the hospital? And don't have to say anything. Present, something present to gift. This incredible universe we live. Think for a minute, not like water, but I do. Image of in water, or perhaps you floating in water, and you're looking up at the sky above you. And you know that if you panic or if you move, but if you just float, stretching out your arms and breathing deeply, then you become part of the sea, and there is nothing to fear. You are not the waves, you're not the current, but you are part of that whole incredible universe. Above you, you see the clouds. The clouds come, the clouds go. But you are not the cloud, you are part of all of creation. Those moments of stillness are so important in our lives. But then there's another silence. It's a silence beyond words. Peter Brook, the great theatre director, talks about this silence. It's the silence at the end of a great play where the play ends and no one claps, or there is no, the only Royal Albert beyond words. And the last silence I'd like to share with you is something that happened to me yesterday. This church is a church which has a heart for people who are homeless and vulnerable, as many of you will know. And many of those homeless people at the moment are people from other countries who've come here as migrants hoping for a place of welcome, a place to belong. In Lampedusa, in Italy, one of the small islands in Italy, as many of you will know, many of those migrants arrive in boats. And on that island, many people have been washed ashore who have lost their lives in the sea. There is a carpenter, an Italian carpenter called Mr. Tocco, who works in Lampedusa. And from the wreckage of one of the ships, which was washed up on the shore of Lampedusa, he made it his gift to the people to make small crosses. I heard about this story and I wrote to him and I asked him if he would make a cross for this church, a cross which would say, everyone is welcome here, that somehow we have seen and heard your pain, and this church is a place which says, refugees are welcome here. Mr. Todd speak any to translate from Lampedusa. And inside that package was a cross made from the gunwale of one of the ships that sunk and on which many people lost their lives. I took it to the connection next door because I was running a spirituality group there, and I passed the cross around a group of people who have known homelessness. And everyone was completely silent. Completely silent. And then one of the members of the group, we noticed tears running down his face. And another of the group passed him a paper handkerchief. I want to show you that cross now. Contemplate in silence. We hold or we heal in our hearts the sins and the pain of the world. I ask you in the silence of this day, as you sit in silence also, that we also may hold in our hearts the pain of our world at this time and ask for peace and healing, a healing beyond words, a healing that only God can bring. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. The first is the Lama Gelongma Zangmo, who first became a practicing Buddhist in 1977. She received teachings from many highly respected lamas and was inspired to enter a 4-year retreat in 1984, during which time she became a Buddhist nun. Shortly after finishing that retreat, she entered another 3 or 4 year retreat, and then another, finishing a period of lengthy retreats in 1993. She then became a teacher and was asked to help to run the Kagyu Samye Dzong Centre in London, which was opened in 1998, and since then has flourished under her guidance and leadership. Also in 1998, she was one of a group of nuns who went to India, where she became fully ordained as a Gelongma at a historic ceremony. And she has officiated in that capacity since. She's described as working tirelessly and joyfully in service to Dharma and helping others. And she became the first person in the UK to be honoured with the title of Lama. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Lama Gelongma Zangmo.
Thank you very much, and I would like to especially say thank you to Richard Carter for that very, very moving, beautiful sermon. It really, to me, epitomized this whole idea of transcendence, especially showing that cross. To me, transcendence is about what, certainly from the way we see it in Buddhism, is we all want to be happy. We share that. It doesn't matter which tradition we come from, which religion or no religion we come from. All of us share this inner longing and wish to be happy. We don't want to suffer. We want to transcend suffering. Transcendence, I was trying to think about what does it mean when this title of transcendence. So I can only think of it like this. This is what we share. All those shipwrecked in Lampedusa. Wherever we look in the world, there is suffering. There is pain. All different levels of it, all different degrees of it. As human beings, we suffer. Any living being is experiencing different degrees of suffering. And on our spiritual path, and in whatever path we find ourselves on, that is what we strive to do, transcend suffering. And then we go about it in all different ways. Now, of course, I am a Buddhist. I'm a Buddhist nun, as you see. And so I speak from the Buddhist point of view. And that's all I know about, really. But the story, the life story of the Buddha sort of encapsulates our own path in a big, in sort of to varying degrees. When you look at the life of the Buddha, he started as a prince. Not that we are all princes and princesses, but he started and through different experiences in his life and his childhood, he encountered old age, sickness, old age, and death in various forms, observing this, experiencing this around him. And he came to this realization that there is pain, there is dukkha in Sanskrit, dukkha. And this was the beginning of his path, which he eventually, later on, then he became, from Prince Siddhartha, he became the Buddha, which we call him the awakened one, the enlightened one, the awakened one, the realized one, many different names. But so through the Buddha's path, first is observance of suffering, of dukkha. And then the path that led him out of this, that helped him to transcend this suffering, dissatisfaction. And then after that, the Buddha, he spent his life, the rest of his life, out in teaching people how can you find inner happiness. How can you be free from suffering? What is the path that leads you to freedom from suffering? So before we can really transcend, before we can reach any form of transcendence, the Buddha said we need to understand suffering, and we need to understand the causes of suffering. Why is it that there is pain in the world? Why is it that there is all these different troubles in the world that we see now and that have always existed in varying degrees? Now we're in the 21st century, busy life, we're in the heart of London, but I think whatever age we look at, there has been loss and gain and sickness, old age, death. So there has been suffering. And if we want to transcend this, if we want to find this inner peace, we need to understand the causes of this suffering. Otherwise, it's like we try to sort of jump to the top of the ladder. We have to go step by step to get somewhere. We can't just do a long sprint to the end. So the Buddha taught these four noble truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of the causes of suffering. So the first two truths are about this fact that there is pain and dissatisfaction in the world. And then the last two truths are about the fact that it's possible to transcend suffering. So it's the truth of this transcendence, you could call it, or being free from suffering. And then the truth of the path that leads to this thing. How do we do it? How do we go about freeing ourselves from suffering? Now, there are many paths. It is not as if Buddha said, this is the only path. Like when we want to go to the top of a mountain, there are many paths leading to the top of that mountain. So again, I can only speak from the Buddhist point of view. But basically, the Buddha taught that the causes of all of this chaos, all of this we see war, we see homelessness, all these many different types of suffering. The cause of that is, the root of it is not knowing who we are. A certain confusion and ignorance. Confusion about the nature of the way things are. And that is what we find in the silence, in the meditation. We try to discover, we try to come to understand who we are, what is actually going on. By looking inside, we try to find this inner peace, this transcendence. So the causes of suffering, the Buddha said also, it's our selfishness, this tendency to be separate from others. And by transcending that separateness and finding our wholeness, we find also happiness. That in this constant striving for me, myself, my happiness, that we are so busy with, we are actually creating our own suffering. The Buddha taught that when we give up ourselves and our own needs and think about others, when we transcend this clinging and attachment that we have to everything to do with me and mine, and when we start to think more about others, see the importance of others, see the sameness of everyone in this shared need and shared wish for happiness, then we actually find inner peace and true happiness. And I think actually that is a view shared by most of the world religions. The language is a little bit different, the language we speak, but ultimately we try to be one, whether you call it one with God, or whether you call it clarity and emptiness, or whether you call it being awakened or being realized or understanding the nature of mind. I think that ultimately it comes to the same. It comes to that top of the mountain. We are just walking from different sides. Sometimes we can't see the paths of the others on the other side of the mountain. Maybe we meet at the top. We'll all meet at the top of the mountain. We'll get a surprise, won't we? Hello. Why did we have to have all this separation in the first place when we're all going for the same thing? Whenever there is, if we look at it, when we have strong pain, when we have strong sense of whatever, despair, loss, loneliness, depression, if we look to the root of that, we see a huge sense of me. It's all about me. So we can cut straight through that. Or if we can send that to everyone. That little person, I have a life of so many years at the most, but there's all these others out there. They have to be more important than me. Certainly, we ought to look at it like that. We ought to think of others more than ourselves. So this, the Buddha's teachings is his idea that through taming our mind through study, contemplation, and meditation, we come to that inner peace that transcends selfishness, and we reach a state of non-duality. You talk about non-duality. Sometimes emptiness and clarity, but emptiness doesn't sound very nice, does it? When you say emptiness in Buddhism, it means a space that is full of qualities, but it means that vastness of everything that allows us to be here. Like the space where all the clouds appear and dissolve back into space again. I loved Richard Carter's meditations. They were so beautiful, and they were actually very much similar to what we use in Buddhism. This whole idea that we tend to identify with the thoughts rather than with the vastness of who we really are. So just like the clouds in the space, we say, I am not who I think I am. I am not all these thoughts and all these complications. I am the vastness of that space, like where the clouds appear in space and dissolve back into space. So emptiness has this idea of being full of qualities. The Buddha had the richness of the qualities of wisdom and compassion, of knowing and understanding the suffering of others. How am I doing for time?
You're doing fine.
Yeah, doing fine. Yeah. So in Tibetan, the word Buddha, well, Sanskrit, Buddha is actually Sanskrit, but it was translated into Tibetan as Samye. And Sang means purify, to purify. And Je means to blossom or to expand or to fully embrace. And you could say that's what the idea of understanding the nature of mind, finding inner peace, transcending this suffering, you could say that's what it means to, when everything that needs to be purified has been purified, and that is all our selfishness, habitual patterns, our grasping, our aversion, our confusion, jealousy, pride, all the negative emotions, when all of that has been purified, and when all of the potential that we have has blossomed, all the good qualities, generosity, kindness, patience, compassion, tolerance, right conduct, ethics, when all of that has blossomed to its full, that potential that we all have, then we are a Buddha. Then we have transcended. Then we are where we need to be, where we want to be. Then we have inner peace. And then we're able to perhaps do something, bring a little bit of peace to others as well. And I think that perhaps gives you a little bit of a view of or an idea of the Buddhist view of transcendence. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lama. Zangmo. A wonderful exposition of the transcendental nature of meditative Buddhism. And it's always striking that when one hears from people who do practice meditation, whatever background they come from, whatever faith tradition, they always end up speaking about the same things, about the development of the finest, purest of human qualities, and of the peace and the stillness which is at the very heart of human being, and which can be at the very heart of all human life. So thank you very much indeed. We now hear from Neville Hodgkinson. Neville Hodgkinson is a devotee, I think is the right word, of the Brahma Kumaris, which he joined, I think, in or about 1988, and has been an active participant with ever since. He's also a journalist, an author, a meditator, and a practitioner of the best, I think, in spiritual life. The Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual University is itself a woman-led spiritual training organization which was founded in India in the mid-1930s and now has a strong following right across the globe. So I'm delighted to welcome Neville Hodgkinson. Thank you. Neville will lead the silence at 11 o'clock.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks to the Justice Day organisers for inviting me here. I'm also on a path of purification, but I have quite some way to go, and I realise that when I get caught in a traffic jam like I did this morning, I was desperately trying to transcend my irritation, but I had only partial success. But it wasn't too bad, because as soon as we arrived and Richard took us across to the side there, and I experienced about 15 minutes of the meditation and immediately jumped into that beautiful bath of silence. It was a great pleasure. And then, of course, hearing from Richard Carter and Lama Zangmo has been a huge pleasure. It's reminded me of something that has taken me quite a long time to understand, actually, which is that love and compassion and understanding all enable self-transcendence, or they are a consequence of self-transcendence. The two go together. This took me time to understand, because when I began on the spiritual journey, I was already in my late 30s and came from having lived a rather selfish, ego-driven life in the media, which was regularly causing me big ups and downs, and probably, even though I was working as a medical correspondent, I felt that I was a candidate for a coronary, which would have been very embarrassing for my newspaper if I had collapsed of a heart attack at the age of 40 or whatever. And but I was fortunate because learning about medicine from doctors at the forefront of their field, especially I found myself gravitating towards those who were aware of the importance of our thoughts and feelings in maintaining good health or in making us ill. And so this actually was one of the things that helped me to open up to an understanding that a different way forward was needed for me. And it's a special pleasure to be here, actually, some 36 years on from when I began. It was October 1980, and a doctor friend had invited me to a press conference at the Westminster Abbey, just nearby. And the Dean of Westminster was speaking alongside a Swami, a visiting Swami from India. And they both spoke about the soul, and it was language that, working as a medical and science correspondent, I hadn't been at all familiar with. And in the silence that followed their talks at what was supposed to be a press conference, a sort of golden red light opened out in my forehead, and I was absolutely shocked by it, paced the streets for a couple of hours, and then it was accompanied by extraordinary bliss. And I went back to the office and looked up Gray's Anatomy to try and find out what had happened in my brain that had produced such an experience, but I couldn't get away with that. And the next day I put my notice in, and quite soon afterwards, while working as a freelance, I came across the Brahmakumaris, who have turned out to be good guides for me. So I stumbled into transcendence in a sense. It was like a gift to me that gave me such a deep sense of joy and lifted me out of the stress that I was experiencing at that time. And the problem was that when I went along to other gatherings, like this one, where I stepped into the beauty of the piece here, I would feel as if I charged my battery of well-being from those gatherings. But then when I was back in the newspaper office, which quite soon afterwards I was, I would use up whatever I'd gained and find myself caught up with my ego and all the other things quite quickly. So this carried on. There was a big change immediately because of having been so hungry, and satisfying that thirst by going into these gatherings of meditative practitioners was a great help. But deeper change was needed than simple experience, a simple kind of drawing on the atmosphere from outside and from experienced people experiencing the inner journey. You can receive from them because of the beautiful vibrations that their purity brings. But actually I found that one of the things that allowed me to make a big step forward was a shift in my understanding. And it was particularly interesting to hear Lama Zangmo speaking of how important that is in Buddhism. I think the reason that I was able to experience so beautifully in those first years, when I was in the gatherings, I had such a materialistic outlook conditioned in my brain, but I'd lost confidence in my intellect, and so I underwent what I called an intellect bypass operation, where it allowed me to sort of function with my intellect in my everyday work, but then switch into this other mode of being that bypassed my brain. And that was very fortunate, actually, because it allowed me to experience this transcendent aspect of my being. But the aim ultimately is to be able to, not to sort of fly off the planet, but to live in this world, but in a way where it doesn't encroach on your mind and your being in ways that cause you suffering, and then to others too. Not able to. A shift has happened from my being really quite an out-and-out materialist. It's become very clear to me that there is a source of truth, which I can connect to, and I can feel it with my mind, and which nourishes and sustains. And I've learned that when you drink deeply at this well, various addictions and dependencies and compulsive behaviors will fall away. So this is a wonderful discovery. some kind of love has filled my heart with happiness, and it's healing. Some old wounds have disappeared. But I've also developed the deep conviction, and this is where the cognitive shift has come, which has really, I feel, empowered me on top of those lovely experiences, the deep conviction that the essence of who I am is spirit and not matter. I've actually been helped in this shift, not just by the teachings of the Brahmakumari Spiritual University, because these teachings were there, but I somehow wasn't able to make that shift in my brain. But I've recently been looking quite a bit at frontier science, which supports the spiritual perspective. And I thought today I would like to just give you a flavour of that, because I've found it so valuable. The way the science is moving is to support the idea that I'm an individuated unit or agent of consciousness, a soul in more traditional language, and playing a role in this physical world. And this shift has now happened in my head and my brain, in my way of understanding the world. And I'm grateful for it, because it means that there's more of a congruity, if you like, between my head and my heart. This emerging paradigm in science maintains that consciousness is primary, the ground of being from which the material world emerges. It's mind-boggling to most scientists, to most people, frankly. We are so imbued with the materialist worldview, with all the BBC programs on science. Everywhere you hear discussions. Even religious-minded people, I feel, quite often have bought into the scientific model, even though they feel that there is a part of them that somehow is relating to the transcendent. But this new model, which the frontier scientists, who are not fringe people, but leading professors in various fields are offering us, it's as if the mind of nature, which is a massively complex program, is putting on a play of life in order that consciousness, in all its forms, from single-celled amoebae to humans with their 50 trillion plus cells, can perceive and take part in the varied scenes that life offers. And this is an amazing perspective. It's really, really interesting. You don't hear much about it, but it does actually connect with a Bank of America report that hit world headlines recently. Do you remember this one? Analysts for the Bank of America, there were headlines about this quite widely. Analysts stated that many scientists, philosophers, and business leaders believe that there is a 20 to 50% probability humans are already living in a computer-simulated virtual world. I love it. This was what they stated. This is in America, okay. But a similar idea formed the basis of the hit 1990 movie, The Matrix. Do you remember that? Fascinating movie. It became quite feeding a story into the brains of these humans who were kept in pods, and it was really just to serve the interests of the computers. But the new science at the frontiers is pointing to a mind-like quality of which we form part at the root of existence. And it's from this mental realm that what we call the physical world and the play of creation is projected. Now, this isn't new. Nearly 100 years ago, apart from ancient understandings that were in line with this kind of understanding, nearly 100 years ago, the founders of quantum mechanics, which is a hugely successful way of understanding the world of the very small, of subatomic particles and vibratory fields, the founders of that hugely successful branch of physics were struck by the inextricability of mind and matter at that level. I've got one or two quotes that I'd like to share with you, which demonstrate this, and it's just so astonishing to me that I sort of had to dig these out. They're not in common currency. Max Planck, who's considered the father of quantum mechanics, he stated, and there was more to it, but he was talking about how he'd been a believer in the material world all his life, and he said, all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. we must assume behind this force is the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. And Einstein, who quarreled with some aspects of quantum theory, probably rightly, there's still something missing in it. He famously said, God does not play dice. But Einstein said, everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit vastly superior to that of man, and one in the face of which we with our modest powers must feel humble. And there was a British physicist around that time, 1930, he wrote a book, forgotten the title, but he said, this was Sir James Jeans, very eminent physicist and mathematician, the stream of knowledge is heading towards a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine. Mind no longer appears as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We are beginning to suspect that we ought rather to hail it as a creator and governor of the realm of matter. So that was in the 30s. Now there's been a long gap in which we turned away from those ideas. I suspect it was because of the horrors that came about in Nazi Germany, in the ideologies of Stalin's Russia, Soviet Union, millions dying in the name of certain ideals, certain ideologues. It's as if my generation, I was born towards the end of the war years, we grew up feeling somehow, many of us, that let's not go into those sort of territories of the uncertain. Let's just deal with practical, tangible realities that we can measure and be sure about and get on with life in that way. And I think perhaps that is a kind of ethic in science on the materialistic side. So there has been this long gap in which those findings back in the 20s and 30s were neglected. But as today's scientists and mathematicians delve more deeply into the quantum realm, some are mounting similar, strong challenges to their materialist colleagues. One is Professor Donald Hoffman. He's a professor of cognitive science at the University of California at Irvine. He published a fascinating 37-page paper just a few years back, presenting a case that what we perceive as physical objects, like this lectern and my body and brain and everything, are really more like icons. All the different this isn't really what it looks. We know that actually if we go down into the subatomic nature of this, it's whirring subatomic particles, but somehow an image of something useful to me like this has been created, even though the reality of it is that it is being projected by mind from a deeper level. This is the way he's argued his paper. Deepak Chopra picked up on this, and in an article in the Huffington Post with Professor Rudolf Tanzi, the headline on it was, "Good news, you are not your brain." Now that is good news, because if you understand that the conditioning in your brain can be sidestepped, as I did in those early days, that is a very empowering thing to understand. It means that you can start to really take the reins of your mind and consequently your brain, and your brain will change, as the neuroscientists tell us, according to how you use it. So Hoffman writes, and you can see plenty of him on YouTube, consciousness has always been fundamental and matter derivative. The picture of an evolving, unconscious universe of space-time, matter, and fields that over billions of years fitfully gives birth first to life, then to consciousness, is false. And then there's Richard Henry, a professor of physics and astronomy at Johns Hopkins University in the US. And in Nature, that top science journal, he wrote an essay headed "The Mental Universe." And he wrote, "It is not matter that creates an illusion of consciousness," which is the conventional scientific view, that somehow the complexity of our brains produces this illusion of consciousness, but consciousness that creates an illusion of matter. That is correct physics. It is not controversial in the slightest degree that there is no material reality. This has been demonstrated in both theory and experiment. And a final quote from one of very, very current. Dr. Ron Garrett, who was one of the geniuses who founded Google, he says, the mathematics of quantum information theory tell us unambiguously that particles are not real. We are not physical entities, but informational ones. We are not made of atoms, we are made of quantum bits. What we usually call reality is really a very high-quality simulation running on a quantum computer. So these are the kind of ideas that are actually emerging. We find them mind-boggling because we're so steeped in the materialistic view, but there is supportive experiential data too. You're probably familiar with the near-death experience. There have been thousands of these cases reported now, where people have died and then clinically died, and then minutes, sometimes longer, later they're resuscitated, and they speak of their consciousness having expanded, not having been reduced. They feel as if they're part of some field of awareness which is much wider than the conventional view of the world that the brain enables them to have. The brain seems to be like a filter that enables us to focus on the part that we're playing, but actually if we step beyond that into this transcendent realm, you access some much deeper realities. So this is the picture that is emerging, but I think it's also becoming clearer that in our overstimulated humorous world, we've closed too tightly those doors of perception of what used to be called the divine. One of the best studies of the near-death experience was by Dr. Pim van Lommel, a cardiologist in Holland. He ran a study for several years involving many hospitals, and his summary of it was that enveloped by light, people experience total acceptance and unconditional love and have access to a deep knowledge and wisdom with indescribable clarity and insight. And some of the people who have had these experiences say things like the pinnacle of everything there is, of energy, of love especially, of warmth, of beauty. And they say, on return, a single loving thought would let me be part of the whole again. And I find that very important. Now that I understand that I am consciousness, I am soul, I'm not a material being, I am an embodied soul, so the human is both, but at that deeper level, beyond the temporary nature of this body, I will continue as that individuated consciousness. And when that's understood, you start to discover that awareness becomes much more available to you when, as we've been hearing earlier from the other speakers, when we live with compassion, when we live with love, because it's as if that is the deeper nature of reality. The selfishness, which we sometimes find ourselves forced into in this competitive world, is not really who we are. And when we live in those ways, we're betraying the deeper truth about ourselves. So it's important in the process of embracing the transcendent, not simply to take your mind into anything in this realm that lies beyond, because from what I understand, there are many, many different levels to it. But actually, if you feel that you're able to connect to the highest, which is your love, you connect to the highest in you, what happens is it's like when you choose to feel positivity and love and peace, it's as if you are tuning into a broadcast. You're tuning into the deeper nature of this field of consciousness which is running the show. And that empowers you as well. It's a wonderful thing. So that's really what I wanted to say, that you, by allowing the highest to enter you, that then enables you more and more to live a life of love. And there are some individual stories coming through on this as well. Apart from those near-death experiences, scientists who've had experiences of the transcendent when their brain has been put out of action temporarily. You might have seen the TED talk by Jill Bolte-Taylor, a brain scientist whose left hemisphere was shut down. She speaks very eloquently of this amazing sense of expanded awareness. And Eben Alexander, a brain surgeon in the States, he wrote a book called Proof of Heaven. His frontal cortex was wiped out by a bacterial infection, and he was gone for a week. They thought they'd lost him. When he came back, he just wanted to write about this incredible realm that he'd entered. He wrote, "Love is without a doubt the basis of everything." He said, "I was encountering the reality of a world of consciousness that existed completely free of the limitations of my physical brain. My experience showed me that the death of the body and the brain are not the end of consciousness." This is such an important thing for us to understand. And in a strange way, I think it's the secret of what we might call sustainable transcendence. If we fill the heart with acceptance and appreciation and happiness, and enable the brain to become cool through understanding, deep understanding, our lives can then become beacons of light in these uncertain times. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing to aim for. Thank you. I think now we're going to have 3 minutes of silence, and maybe in that period we simply take our minds with gratitude into this beautiful awareness of the inner being that is love and peace. Yes, we find ourselves in this material world with its limitations, but we don't have to be lost in that. When we understand that the transcendent is a reality, that there is a kind of spiritual sun radiating unsullied truth towards us, if only we open our minds towards it, then we can begin to bring the beauty of this deep truth into our everyday lives as human beings.
Thank you very much, Neville. Right. It is, of course, most useful to be reminded that even in what seems to be sometimes a relentless torrent of materialist science, the most eminent of scientists find that the world is not nearly as material as we often think that it is, and that there's every reason to think being than we can ever experience or know simply by observation of the material world. Musicians are no stranger to this kind of experience, and I'm very happy, therefore, to be able to introduce now Peter Nall, who is going to play some Bach for us. Peter has some 30 years' experience of performing at the highest level as an orchestral and chamber violinist, and I think has an understanding of the importance of music in reaching the deepest realms of human experience. I think we're waiting for a music stand. Is that all we're waiting for? Wherever you feel happiest. Perhaps, do you want to come up on the corner here? Thank you. Peter has asked that at the end of his playing there should be no applause. Perhaps we should be left in a profound silence. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to play some movements from two different Bach unaccompanied sonatas and partitas. The first one, I'm going to play 4 movements of the famous second partita in D minor, which has the chaconne at the end. Unfortunately, there's not time to play the chaconne, as that's nearly 20 minutes in itself, and takes a lot of work. But I'm going to play the allemande, the courante, then a jig, and then finish that with the slow sarabande. And then I shall do 2 movements from the E major sonata, which I'll tell you more about later. So this is the allemande, the partita in D minor. shall now, excuse me. I'll now play the two movements from the E major sonata, which is the last of the 6 partitas and sonatas. I shall play the gavotte and rondo, where you'll hear a rondo tune that keeps coming back with little episodes in between, which has been my daily warm-up for many years. And finally, the jig, which is the last movement of the sonata. So this is the sonata in E major. Much brighter key.
Thank you very much, Peter. Rather reminds us of the moment that Father Laurence Freeman spoke of this morning at the end of the concert. That we're transported in a way by the music to realms of experience, which with the help of meditation can become readily accessible to everyone. So it is my pleasure now to reintroduce Father Laurence. Father Laurence is very well known as the founder of the World Community for Christian Meditation. He's been working with that organization, perhaps even as that organization, for some 20 years, and is the director of a global community of some 2,000 meditation groups in 114 different countries. I suspect that one needs meditation in order to be able to cope with that. Father Laurence is a Benedictine monk, and as I say, has vast experience in leading and inspiring people in meditation. And I think he has something to say to us this morning. So once again, Father Laurence. And Father Laurence will lead the silence at 12 o'clock.
Thank you again. Well, Walter Pater, I think, said that all art aspires to the condition of music. So I suppose that includes the art of talking, thinking, and all the other arts. And listening to the Bach, I think, is very extraordinarily enriching, uplifting, illuminating, and totally mystifying. What on earth is it saying? It totally transcends our ordinary language. How do you translate that Bach into language? You can't do. You could talk about all sorts of technicalities, I'm sure, but it's untranslatable back. But there is a sense of a syntax, a meaning, emotion, feeling, variety, and internal dialogue within the music. It's ways of expressing something of what language is. And then at the end, there's this feeling of a resolution. But what's being resolved, we don't know. We can't express in words, but it's very real and transformative. Although it's a very abstract language, it touches us physically, perhaps more thoroughly, more physically and interiorly than any other art or any other language. So, I don't know what to say after a feast of Bach like that, except it's kind of refreshing perhaps to think that Bach had 16 children, wasn't it? So he must have used a lot of language, keeping them quiet and educating them and dealing with their problems, and then going off to the church leaders in Leipzig to get his salary and negotiate for a better salary and so on. What's all the more remarkable is that he was able to integrate, of course, this extraordinary language and vision in music into his life, an ordinary life. He seems to be in many ways a very ordinary professional musician. So maybe, although all art, all thought aspires to the condition of music, and students of consciousness often express the idea today that music came before language, before words, that we in fact can communicate and did communicate better, more thoroughly through music than we can through the agency of words. But anyway, if all art aspires to the condition of music, maybe music aspires to the condition of silence. So where do we go after the music? And I think this is something of an experience of the transcendence that we're trying to think about today and practice in the meditation. Transcendence is an idea, of course, that we find in religion, in philosophy, even in mathematics, transcendental numbers. I have no idea what transcendental numbers are, but they must be about transcending something. It expresses a basic human intuition that we must go beyond our perceived limits, and we're always running up against our limitations. We sometimes hide them, we sometimes fight them, we sometimes deny them, but we're always running up against them in one way or another, physically, psychologically, intellectually. And in order to become truly human, or more fully awake, we have to go beyond these limits. That's an idea. But meditation takes us beyond the idea of transcendence into the actual experience of transcendence. It's not abstract. Meditation is no more abstract than music, in fact. In simple terms, we transcend habitual state of consciousness, of which the great limitation is our egoism, our self-centeredness. That's our big problem, our big limitation, going beyond that limitation. Our egocentricity, where we see ourselves at the center of everything, and everything revolving around ourselves, and our own self-interest. In that perception of reality, when we see it from this egocentric perception, our self-interest seems logically to be the most important thing, to take precedence over anybody else's self-interest. And this is very subtle because there are very many different shades of egoism, many of them religious, and many of them hiding under the mask of altruism, for example. We like to do good things in order to feel good by doing good and having other people see us doing good. But you could say, well, we are doing good, but I'm getting something out of it, and that's why I do it. So meditation frees us most immediately from this prison of egocentricity, in the same way that music frees us from the labyrinth of words. It frees us from this maze of self-consciousness that we can never get out of by thinking about it, or even, in a sense, by trying to get out of it. We do, in a sense, resist this journey of liberation that all the great wisdom traditions acknowledge to be the most important purpose and meaning of of human existence, to liberate ourselves from this prison of self-consciousness. We may fear the unknown quality of freedom. We often call for freedom, but we prefer to be locked up in a safe prison where we can speak about freedom. But increasingly, meditation persuades us, gentle art of persuasion, to let go of that fear and that duplicity and to fall into pure liberty of spirit. And progressively, this opens up our whole personality in new ways and our powers of awareness. May your minds be remade and your whole nature thus transformed. And the most important gift that meditation bestows through all of this long process is the peace of realizing the absolute priority of love, of other-centeredness rather than self-centeredness. In the Christian tradition, contemplation, meditation as a work of contemplation, is seen as a work of love. A work of love from both angles. A work of love in the sense that we are doing this work by taking the attention off ourselves. What else is love except putting our attention onto and into another and finding ourselves in that other? The dynamic of meditation is this pure work of attention. So to take the attention off ourselves is a work of love. But in the same tradition, we discover something in that new world. We discover that we are also the recipients. We are being influenced by, touched by an attention that is coming towards us. Maybe a model of that would be listening to Bach. We feel that we are encountering something. We're meeting Bach. In meditation, we are doing this work of love, and in doing it, as we go beyond our self-consciousness, our self-centeredness, we fall into love. We fall in love. We realize that we are actually being loved. What is love except this reciprocity of attention? And it's this reciprocity of attention that spins us into transcendence. So transcendence involves then union. The ego would like to think of transcendence as being able to transcend anything on which I am dependent, other people or God or circumstances or conditions, so I'd be completely independent. Don't need anyone. Autonomy, hyper-individualism. But that's a false idea of transcendence, which, again, all the wisdom traditions warn us against. And that brings us up against this essential limitation all the more painfully. But what meditation teaches us is actually that transcendence happens through this work of other-centeredness because it leads us into union, into communion. Now, all of that may sound very mystical, and it probably is, but the test of it is how we live. Are we living out this experience of transcendence? And that's going to shape our politics, our culture, our economics, our education, the way we do medicine, and the way we do business. This experience of transcendence is going to determine how we see others who are different from ourselves. It's excellent that we started today with that reflection on the plight of the refugees. This mass migration of peoples that we're facing in the world today is an overwhelming challenge to our civilization and to the reality of our whatever spiritual practice or wisdom tradition we may claim to be following or think we're following. But the test of it is going to be, are we prepared to enter into union with those who are coming towards us in their plight, in their need? And where do we draw the line? Where do we say, so far, or even so many, and no more? So this experience of transcendence that we enter into in meditation has a very real relevance and sheds a very revealing light upon our way of living and interacting. Our modern culture, of course, puts up strong resistance to all of this. We're not conditioned by education, or even usually by religion, or by our ways of training in work, to accept this reality of transcendence into union. Or we may be encouraged to pursue this transcendence, to take up meditation, as if it were just another experience that we can slot into other interesting or experiences that we can call my experience. And then we justify it, or the time we give to it, or the money we may spend on it, because it gives us what we want, but leaves us in control, and above all, leaves us as observers of what we call transcendence. But in real transcendence, there are no observers. The experience of meditation is essentially nothing really that we can call experience in the ordinary sense. When we start to meditate and we look for an experience. And we judge our meditation on the basis of what kind of experience did I have today? Is it good meditation? Oh, very good today. Next week, tomorrow, this evening, the experience doesn't seem so good, and so we're constantly evaluating our experience within the meditation. If we're in a good tradition, if we have good collaborators, if we're in a good community that's shaping our learning of this art of meditation, then we learn to let go of that kind of evaluation, and eventually to let go of any idea that it is my experience at all. Because the transcendence is the transcendence of the ego, so where's my or mine anyway in that? I live no longer, but Christ lives in me, St. Paul says. It's a paradox, like the music, the language of music. I live no longer, but Christ lives in me. We may benefit from thinking and speaking of all of this, and this is something of a mystery, that we need to think about it and speak about it. But it's in the practice, only in the practice, in fact, that we can let go of the experience that we call mine and enter into the reality that brings us into our transformation of consciousness into the fullness of being. So I'd like to take the rest of this time now for us to meditate together, and maybe we can lead into the meditation with the full passage of St. Paul, from which I took that quote at the beginning of this morning. This is how he puts it. My friends, to him, and then you will be able to discern the will of God and to know what is good, what is acceptable, what is perfect. So let's take our time of meditation now.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Father Laurence Freeman. When I was a boy, it organized itself with a slogan. The slogan said, "An island of sanity in a sea of hysteria." I've never come across a newspaper that actually answered that description. But I like to think that occasions like this do that description. It's not exactly an original observation to suggest political turbulence, strife, apparently strong forces of division, and with them displaced peoples, anger, fear, insecurity. And we meet here, and we meet in this way from time to time, to remind ourselves of the enduring realities of human life, and that in the end, the higher qualities of human being and human capacity can prevail over all of these things. And the practice of meditation is capable of giving us daily reminder and daily contact with those eternal realities. But it's important not to consider it as a retreat and an escape from a troubled world. What meditation can do is to give us confidence and hope and equanimity and the power of love with which to meet the difficulties of an apparently troubled world. In the end, it's love that will be the oil on those troubled waters and will bring the human consciousness back to where it belongs. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining in this morning's celebration. I do hope you'll go forward with confidence and hope and some inspiration. It only remains to me to introduce Elizabeth Edmonds, who has organized all of this, brought it all together, and somehow or other, while sitting quietly over there, made it all happen. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Well done.
I just want to say thank you to everybody. I want to particularly flag up Nathan at the back, who's been filming. So if you've enjoyed this morning and you want to see all of it again, or you want to see bits of it again, it will be available through the Justice Day website. I also want to give everybody a prize, and mainly because you are all already very good at transcendence, because you have transcended what is an uncomfortable 2 hours of sitting without a cushion on a seat, which is not really put there for comfort. I had a dream 2 nights ago. First of all, I dreamt that it was Justice Day and the church was completely empty and it was just me. And then I turned over and I had another dream in which the parish council had obviously gone to IKEA and filled the entire church with sofas. But your prize is to be collected at the end is a poem which was written by a young woman about an apple, and she's kindly gifted the poem to us. And it's a beautiful, very simple poem, which just reminds us that in everyday action, the thing which is in front of us is just an icon of consciousness. And do take it. You may be able to take 2. The other thing is that there's a collection for St. Martin. There may be some gift aid envelopes. That always helps the collection swell a bit. There's also downstairs, anybody who would like to join the lunch, there are still some tickets available for that, and it's in the gallery. And my husband will be sitting with a friend, either take your tickets or to give you a ticket. But altogether, it's been a marvellous morning, and well done for sitting for so long, so quietly and so happily. Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Stephen, I think we had, yes. We met last year. Yes. Yes. Are you? Do you live near the park then? So we've not been running open the door very long, so it's being an experiment now that, you know, it's still feels like a new thing. Yes. Well, that's what we're doing. Yes, well, perhaps I'll see you at the event. Yeah.